in the courtroom. I spoke with maybe if I ever did come in and I visited Dad at work. But like when he was in it, which is like an event. Oh, I do watch an empty. I watched one with Kate. So that, and then Dad's retirement, and when I was possibly going to be selected for jury, I wasn't 3 times before this. So that's only my second time. Objection. The prosecution would like to present Exhibit A for evidence. No. It feels like just yesterday we were here for the retirement. Yeah. It was really special that they did that. That was really special that they did their retirement. Dad was glowing. I think it was the happiest day. Other than the birth of you all, maybe our wedding. But other than that, those things. Yeah. Never saw him happier. Yeah.
All rise. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. United States District Court for the Western District, North Carolina, now stated for ceremonial purposes. The Honorable Robert J. Conrad, Jr., Judge of the United States District Court presiding. All persons having been before this court are admonished to draw nearer and they shall be heard. God save the United States. That's honorable.
Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. This memorial session of Superior Court is now in session. The Honorable Carrie D. Williams presiding. All persons having business before this court are admonished to draw near and they shall be heard. God save the state of North Carolina and this honorable court. Please be seated and come to order.
Good afternoon. Today we gather together in a joint ceremonial meeting of the federal and state courts to recognize the extraordinary life and service of one of our number, Mr. James M. Sullivan.
This memorial service is a time-honored tradition when the brothers and sisters of the bar pay homage to the life and times of one of their profession, of one who has shared this unique discipline that binds us together.
Today, we recognize Jim's life and his achievements as a matter of public record and for the sake of our historic and corporate memory.
I will now recognize the past president of the Mecklenburg County Bar, Ms. Heather Culp, who will now give remarks on behalf of the 26th Judicial District Bar. Yes, ma'am.
May it please the court. I am Heather Culp. I'm happy to be here on behalf of the Mecklenburg County Bar as someone who regularly worked with Jim for 20 years or so. So we welcome family, friends, and colleagues and appreciate the opportunity to share Jim with you today. I'm going to ask Ann Tompkins, who's a member of the Memorials Committee for the Bar, to come up and tell us a little bit more about this tradition.
It
does please the court.
My name is Ann Tompkins. I am here in 2 capacities. First, I'm here as a representative of the Mecklenburg County Bar Memorials Committee, and I am here as a friend and colleague of Jim, having worked with him for about 10 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office. First, on behalf of the Mecklenburg County Memorials Committee, we welcome Jim's family, to the courthouse today, and we welcome Jim's colleagues and friends here today. For about 75 years, the Mecklenburg County Bar has convened these memorial services of court to honor members of our bar who have passed away. These individual memorial services of court are unique among local bars in the country, we believe. And we are very proud of this tradition that we have here to gather together both family members and friends of members of our bar who have passed away. It's a very special and it's a very personal tradition. And we believe that we're the only bar in the country who has these sessions. First, it allows friends to get together in this way that we're doing today, to remember a colleague, but it also allows family members to come and see their family member celebrated by their extended court family. So we're happy for you all to be here today and see Jim's court family and work family and hear from us who spent a considerable amount of time with Jim over the years. So in a few minutes, U.S. Attorney Dina King is going to present a resolution honoring Jim. That resolution is going to be made a part of the court record. It will be added to memorial resolutions that have been written by colleagues over this 75-year period of time. For many, many years, there was a giant book at the Bar Center where these memorials went, and you could go read these memorials in this book. There's not a book anymore. You could go on the website and read these memorials, and it's fascinating. You should do it. It is a sort of our history of the bar told person by person, and you can go back and do that. And today, Jim's life history as a lawyer, as a person, as a friend will be added to our book of humanity for the Mecklenburg County Bar. And that's going to be a wonderful thing. And again, a very special part of what we do here at the Mecklenburg County Bar. It's a great tradition. It's a great way to remember people like Jim. And I'm also here, as I said at the beginning, as a colleague and a friend of Jim's. And just on a personal note, when I think about Jim, and I think this is true of many people in the room, the one thing that comes to my mind when I think about Jim is his smile. And I know everybody in this room remembers Jim, remembers one of the things that's hard as a lawyer is to have sort of a consistency in our mental state. And I will say that Jim had a constant, and that constant was optimism, happiness, positivity. And I think that's one thing that I will take away from my time knowing Jim. And so that's on a personal note. And I will now turn the proceeding over to U.S. Attorney Dina King for the reading of the resolution.
Yeah.
You may.
Before I read the resolution, I just wanted to share a few words about the light that shined within Jim. It was a light that anyone that was remotely close to him could clearly see. But most impressive also was the light that Jim was. Jim truly lit up any room. Jim taught many of us in the U.S. Attorney's Office to not sweat the small stuff and to instead keep our eyes set on the things that were most important, which is sometimes difficult because as attorneys, sometimes we really do focus on some of the minor things that at the end of the day don't matter. Jim also taught us to love. While we may have so many differences in life, we're centered on love. And so many of us in the U.S. Attorney's Office are really blessed to have been able to call him our colleague, but he was much more than that. He was, in fact, truly a friend and a mentor to many. Resolution and memorial in memory of James Michael Sullivan. May it please the court, Chris, members of the bar, and friends of Jim. On behalf of the Mecklenburg County Bar, we present this resolution and memorial honoring the life and memory of our former colleague and friend, James Jim Sullivan. Jim was born on January 19th, 1955, and was raised primarily in Bethesda, Maryland. He was the son of William Michael Sullivan Sr. and Doris Neve Sullivan. He was always so proud of his father's service to our nation in the United States Army during the Korean War. As Jim recounted, in 1950, when the North Korean Army attacked South Korea, Lieutenant William Michael Sullivan, a member of the 11th Field Artillery attached to the 24th Infantry Division, was among the first troops shipping out of Japanese island of Kyushu to the defense of South Korea. Lieutenant Sullivan fought from the Pujan perimeter all the way to the Yala River, which bordered China and then was pushed back to Seoul. Lieutenant Sullivan's unit sustained approximately 50% casualties, but served our nation with distinction in an extremely challenging time. His commitment to service to our nation would be carried on by his son, Jim. After graduating from Walt Whitman High School, Jim attended Hillsdale College, a classical liberal arts college in southern Michigan. In 1975, Jim graduated summa cum laude with a major in economics and business administration. Throughout his life, he applauded the values embodied by Hillsdale College, which sought to combine moral and social instruction to develop the minds and improve the hearts of its students. Jim taught accounting, business, and business law at an inner-city vocational school and worked in Healy, Alaska, outside of the Denali National Park, and with a cherry orchard on Flathead Lake, Montana, just south of the Glacier National Park. In August of 1976, Jim matriculated to Georgetown University Law School, where he graduated cum laude. After passing the bar, Jim's first job was in the law department at the Marriott Corporation in Bethesda, Maryland. He enjoyed talking about his experience working with and advising J.W. Bill Marriott as he led the Marriott Corporation. In early 1981, Jim joined the staff of Senator John East's subcommittee of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. He enjoyed talking about the experience of working with Senator East on the Senate Judiciary Committee. In the summer of 1983, he moved on to be legislative counsel for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, where he worked with Assistant Attorney General William Bradford Reynolds. While at Maine Justice, Jim fell in love with Chris, and they married in the fall of 1984. Their first of 4 children, Tim, arrived in December of 1986. Their second, Johnny, in June of 1989. During that time, Jim joined a suburban law firm to practice in the area of construction litigation. On October 20th of 1986, following a stint at Salsa, Jim began serving as a criminal AUSA for the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria, Virginia, where he worked until the summer of 1988. While as an AUSA, in Alexandria, Jim worked on the Washington's Pizza Connection case. When the opportunity arose to join as a civil AUSA in the less congested and more affordable Western District of North Carolina, Jim and Chris and their growing family moved to Charlotte, where their 2 daughters were born. In 1993, Julie, and in 1996, Tiffany. Julie and Caleb married in September of 2020, bringing a son-in-law into the family. During his 32 years as an AUSA in the Western District of North Carolina, Jim's civil litigation covered a wide variety of cases ranging from employment discrimination, constitutional torts, Federal Tort Claims Act, Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, immigration, bankruptcy, and state court litigation. His colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office remember Jim as an outgoing and gregarious person who always has a smile on his face and a word of encouragement. His kindness and consideration was apparent in all that he did, and he was never heard to say a negative word about anyone. Jim enjoyed serving in the church, serving as assistant scoutmaster, meeting in a 20-year Bible study group, playing tennis, hiking, running, bicycling, swimming, traveling, and working in the yard. Jim gave back to the community in a variety of ways, but most prominent to the legal community has been his role in the Federalist Society, an organization of members who believe and trust that individual citizens can make the best choices for themselves and society. Jim's proudest achievements are being married to Chris and being parent to his wonderful children and son-in-law. With a strong sense of adventure and a desire to travel, Jim led his family on numerous cross-country family trips and visited national parks and historic sites in over 35 states. On June 24th of 2022, Jim passed away peacefully with his family after a courageous and difficult battle with cancer. Throughout Jim's strong faith in his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, with exemplary throughout his fight, and his smile was always bright when faced with difficult challenges. One of Jim's favorite biblical verses was 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 13, which reads, "And now abide faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love." In his last message to the United States Attorney's Office, Jim said, "Keep the faith, hope, and love flowing." We will always remember Jim's smile, his professionalism, and his commitment to God, family, and our country. If it pleases the court, with the highest respect and appreciation for James Michael Sullivan, on behalf of the Mecklenburg County Bar, we move that when the court adjourns this session, it do so in memory of and out of respect for James Michael Sullivan. The original of this resolution and memorial be received by the court and inscribed in its minutes, and copies of this resolution and memorial be made available to Chris Sullivan, his widow. At this time, we will now open up for any comments from members of the audience. So if there's anyone here that would like to say some words, if you could please come to the podium at this time.
That was very moving. I'd like to talk about how we should view the great loss of Jim Sullivan. As a Army commander, I had the privilege of leading soldiers and sending them to Afghanistan, sending them to Iraq, and on occasion dealing with the families when there was a loss or an injury or a death. Going to Walter Reed Hospital and seeing the soldiers that had borne the burdens of our nation and done so valiantly. And when you have that opportunity, when there is that profound loss, you think about what it is that you can say, because it's often that you're speechless. It's like, what can you say, Chris? I mean, it's to you and your family. What a loss. We can't even comprehend. But what I can say is that we can use the example and the inspiration of Jim to rededicate ourselves and recommit ourselves to the things that he stood for and the things that he embodied. And I'll put those under three big categories: God, family, country. And what I would, before I launch into that, what I would encourage people to do is to think about the opportunity of coming forward after me and sharing about what they've seen Jim do, because it provides examples for other attorneys to aspire to, and it tells his wonderful family what a wonderful man Jim was. God, there's no question, Jim was devoted to our Lord. There is no question about that. From the moment I met him in 1989, when came down as an Army agency counsel to work on a case that arose out of this courthouse, Jim was devoted absolutely, and that faith was steadfast and never wavered. And Chris, you know that better than anyone. That is an example we should all aspire to. Family. You may not know it, but Jim was always talking about you, and he was always so proud of what you all did. He loved you dearly. He would do anything for you. He celebrated your triumphs, and he just was so committed to each of you. And Chris, you know the man, and you know his commitment to the family. Finally, country. Jim dedicated himself to our nation. He served in multiple capacities. He always followed and treasured the memory of his father, who fought in some of the toughest combat our nation has known in Korea, when the North Koreans pushed all the way down to the Busan perimeter, which was an incredibly terrible thing for the Army. But his father was one of those brave Americans that did their duty at a very, very demanding time. Jim always did his duty, whether it was in the Civil Rights Division in Main Justice, whether it was a criminal AUSA in Alexandria, whether it was a civil AUSA, he always did his duty. It was never about Jim. It was always about the privilege of being an attorney. And with that privilege, he viewed a special responsibility to conduct himself in the highest levels of professionalism and civility. That is the example that I think all of us can ignite within ourselves, because typically, especially in civil litigation, it can get very nasty, it can get very mean, it can get very contentious, but really, as attorneys, we are called to a higher calling, to be professional, and we engage in partake in civility, not because it's a good thing, but because it's also the right thing, because it puts the focus on what the issues are. It takes the focus away from the personalities of the attorneys. It focuses on our task of being officers to the court. And Jim, better than anyone I've ever known, always did that. He never used an opportunity to try to assert himself in a way that would reflect meanness or ill spirit. It was always about, as an officer of the court, how he could do his duty to our country of rising to the highest level of professionalism, and he always did that. And so I'll just conclude my remarks by saying, for me, Chris, Jim is a model. He's an inspiration, and he always will be, in terms of commitment to God, commitment to family, and commitment to our country. And I thank you for sharing Jim with us, and it just was an honor to be his colleague. So I would welcome someone else to follow me.
May it please the court.
Most pleased.
I'm Bill Bradford. Overlapped the entire time at the U.S. Attorney's Office with Jim. We must have had lunch 100,000 times over those years. And I had a couple of thoughts along the lines of what I perceived as one of Jim's great strengths and his faithfulness in so many ways. I was going to just single out three that struck me over and over and over again. The first is faithfulness to his alma mater, Hillsdale College. And early on, I learned a little bit about Hillsdale over lunch. And it's a small but very highly regarded liberal arts college in Michigan. And Jim believed in the vision of Hillsdale and at some point put me on the mailing list for Imprimis. Does anybody else in here get Imprimis? This is ultimately, of course, a fundraising item for the Hillsdale College, but it's got to be the most interesting and the least annoying fundraising letter from any college in the country. It's really first rate. And even now, after more than 20 years of getting Imprimis, I still feel like Jim and I are sitting down for lunch every time I get the issue in the mail. It's special. His faithfulness to his church. At the time that I remember, years and years ago, Jim was helping start a new Anglican church in Charlotte. And he told me over lunch one day that they spent every Saturday evening setting up the chairs in a gym while they didn't have a building. And then the next day they would put all the chairs back. And I have sat on a lot of committees and things like that, church committees in my life. But I thought about what would it mean to give up Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and Sunday afternoon, especially if you're a football fan, for your church. That was a pretty impressive thing that Jim was doing with the chairs. I had to be moved by that. And finally, I think about his faithfulness to his work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's a famous quote, at least AUSAs are very familiar with it, from Supreme Court Justice Jackson. When justice is done, the federal prosecutor has won his case. And I had so many opportunities to discuss the issues with Jim in cases he was working on in the office over lunch. And the thing that consistently impressed me was his standing for that ideal, that he wanted to do what was just according to law. And that's hard. It's hard to figure it out sometimes. But Jim would talk with me and others at length because he was determined to do the right thing for his client, for the court, for the government. And when you have to talk things through again and again to get confident that you're doing the right thing, Jim would do it. And I'm very thankful for those times I had those conversations with him. It certainly helped me in my work. So thank you for that opportunity, and we're with you.
Is there anyone else who wants to make remarks at this time?
Please, court may approach.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chris, Jim's family, friends, colleagues, members of the bar, the bench. My name is Bob Gleason, if you don't know me, and I'm an assistant United States attorney here at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I knew Jim for over 20 years. And I can tell you that Jim, as Ann had said earlier, always had the biggest smile and was always the most optimistic and friendly person that you would meet. And he always had a good word about people. And he genuinely was happy when people experienced success and genuinely wanted to see people succeed. which I think is it's a rare trait. And Jim would sometimes walk around the office, and he would drop by my office, and he wanted to talk about Hillsdale College, where two of my children have gone. And we would talk about it, and he'd like to hear about the latest things that were going on campus. And occasionally he would invite me to lunch with the Huns. And I often didn't have time for that, but on a few occasions I went, and I appreciated being invited. But I will say this, that, and I was inspired to speak today by Gil's remarks, and I do want to tell you about something that happened not too long ago. And I think it really speaks to Jim's character. And one of the hats that I wear at the U.S. Attorney's Office is as the government ethics officer. So I advise AUSAs and staff in the office as to government ethics matters and how to conduct themselves ethically. And after Jim's retirement, Jim, for some reason, was back in the office. And I think he was there and he was just winding up some things, taking care of some loose ends. And he came to my office about a rather small government ethics matter. And I advised him, and I was really struck by that because I knew his condition, I knew what he was going through, and I knew he was retired, but he was still concerned with government ethics and doing the right thing, even at that time. So that's a little glimpse into Jim's character, as you're well aware, and those of us who had the pleasure of working with him know as well. I'll say this. Jim Sullivan is one of the finest men that I've ever known. And I'm a better person for having known him. And I suspect that there are others in this courtroom that would say the same.
Anyone else? Any judges?
Okay. I'll just speak briefly. I met Jim in 1996 when I became an AUSA here in the Western District. And my first impression of him, believe it or not, was like, wow, he looks like Superman. He just had this physique and this way about himself, and he just carried himself like Superman. And that was my first impression, is, wow, Clark Kent. And I was just in awe of him. He was such a gentleman. And that's the thing that struck me the most, is no matter who he was speaking with, what he was speaking about, what the situation was, he was always a true gentleman. And it's rare, in my opinion, that we see people who conduct themselves in that fashion. And about 2 or 3 years into the position, I was asked to sit second chair with Jim in a civil sexual harassment trial. And Jim and I ended up spending a lot of time together working on that case, traveling out of county to interview witnesses. And even when the opposing side had some witnesses that we were aware of, and we talked to several people, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to lose this case, we're going to lose this case. It was going to be my first civil jury trial. And Jim was cool the entire time. We had the trial, and before having the trial, we prepped an expert witness who taught me everything I ever wanted to know about histrionic personalities. And then I was determined that I may have had a histrionic personality, but it's not that funny. But
It's pretty funny.
but yes, but Jim, I learned a lot from him. It was probably the course of 3 or 4 months that we spent a lot of time working on this case. And then in the process of having the trial, we learned a lot about each other, and he talked about his kids and his family a lot. But I enjoyed working with him. I enjoyed learning from him, and I'll never forget his personality, and I'll never forget his laugh. He had a contagious kind of laugh and a contagious smile, and he was always upbeat and had a calm spirit about him at all times. And so that was just very fond memories of Jim, and it's a huge loss. It's a huge loss.
So I'm delighted to co-preside over this and to be with Judge Edie Williams, our careers have gone in different directions and different courts. And it's just fitting that Jim Sullivan would bring us together to co-preside over this wonderful ceremony. Everybody's talked about Jim's smile, and I just want to tell one story about Jim where the smile doesn't factor in too much, and that is that back when we were working in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Bill was going to lunch with Jim at Gus's Sir Beef, and Karen was going to get her hair done someplace. Several of us used to go running with Jim. And Jim had a really interesting running technique. As people who know Jim well, his breathing wasn't always the best. And when we ran on a hot summer Charlotte day, his breathing got really labored, which was good for some of the rest of us who were breathing pretty hard, but not quite as hard as Jim. But here was his technique. He would ask some profound question that engaged everybody else in terms of answering the question. And once having asked the question, Jim could just concentrate, on the next breath. And it was very clever. And I look at the Sullivan family, and I remember you all as little children. And I remember Friday night frenzies. I don't know if you all remember that, but it was amazing to me seeing you walk through the door as adults. And it's such a profound privilege to have you in our court hearing about your dad and the professional respect that his integrity engendered. And so I love it when my court family gets to meet my own family. And I love it when the family gets to see how respected someone is in the profession. And so I had a chance to think about what I would say about Jim when I had the privilege of speaking at his ceremony. I want to repeat just some of those words here. I said then that Jim was one of the most principled men I ever met. There was no doubt where he stood in matters of faith, public policy, law, Hillsdale College, anything. You never had to say to Jim, tell me what you really think. Yet, is there a person here who can name an enemy of Jim's? He had none. In this fractious, divided time, Jim walked among us with a smile. He spoke words of encouragement. And even in his last days, his questions were always about you and others, not the difficulties he was confronting daily. That's the Jim Sullivan that I'm sure his family knows, and that's the man of integrity that his colleagues knew. And it's an honor to celebrate him today. On behalf of the judges of the Western District of North Carolina, the court orders that the comments presented at this hour be spread upon the minutes of this federal court and filed with the clerk of court, with copies presented to the family of our departed brother at the bar.
On behalf of the judges of Mecklenburg County Superior Court, the court orders that the comments at this hour be spread upon the minutes of this state court and filed with the clerk of court for Mecklenburg County.
Furthermore, in a moment, I will ask the United States Marshal to adjourn this memorial session of the court and to do so in memory of and out of respect for Mr. James M. Sullivan. Fare thee well, colleague, and Godspeed.
Sheriff, please adjourn the court in honor and memory of Mr. James M. Sullivan.
Yes, oh yes, oh yes. This joint session of federal and state court is adjourned in memory of and out of respect for Mr. James M. Sullivan.